Whatever you think about Margaret Thatcher, and I'm not a fan, but she certainly had a powerful image. However, the Conservatives, Rishi Sunak's following several prime ministers who have.
In all of fun in their own ways, have made.
The fact that
Oh.
it's trying to crawl underneath the seat again. Got stuck. Okay, this is gonna be fun to edit, Dad. Like, just like it's. I got stuck. Hello and welcome back to Uncodified. As Rishi Sunak has just announced the general election for the 4th of July, we have scrambled together to put this episode, or we have scrambled to put this episode together to explain how elections work in the UK. Charlotte, take it away.
Oh, the first thing to understand is who the hell are we voting for? In Britain, we live under a parliamentary system. In order to form a government, a prime minister has to be able to form a majority in the House of Commons. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be made up of one political party, but usually does. It could be made up of a coalition of parties, as was the case in the 2010 to 2015 Parliament when the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats governed together. Or alternatively, you could have a confidence and supply agreement where a small party agrees to prop up a minority government by voting for its budget and support of votes such as votes of no confidence, but does not have a role in government. This was the case in the 2017-2019 Theresa May government, which was held up by the DUP.
Elections in the UK have been held every 5 years since the 1911 Parliament Act, which changed it from the limit of 7 years. This does not mean that an election has to take place every 5 years. The Prime Minister can choose to dissolve Parliament early and call an election whenever they like within that 5 years. This power officially resides within the King, as it is a royal prerogative, but the King hasn't used it by himself since the 1830s. For a short while during the 2010s, the Fixed Term Parliament Act meant that the power to call an election was taken away from the Prime Minister, and instead it was required that there be a two-thirds majority vote in Parliament, which is how the elections of 2017 and 2019 were called.
Rishi Sunak did not have to call an election until December, which would have meant a general election would have taken place on the 28th January 2025, which is 5 years and 6 weeks from the last election. He is going early because at this moment he feels like he's a better chance than if he ran out the clock, and well, we'll have to see about that. So now we'll move on to this next section, which is how the first past the post system works, and I'll take it away, Samuel.
Indeed, sir. Thank you for this great honour. The UK is divided into 650 constituencies. In each of these constituencies, there is an election to vote for a Member of Parliament or an MP, apart from the Speaker, who is generally not contested. In each constituency, whoever gets the most votes becomes a Member of Parliament. You do not need to get a majority of the votes to become MPs, just one more than your closest opponent.
This means that the percentage of a vote a political party gets and the number of seats they have can be completely unproportional. It is possible for a party to win the most number of seats but not have the most votes. This was the case in the February 1974 election, where Labour under Harold Wilson was the largest party of a hung parliament with 301 seats, but had 200,000 less votes than Edward Heath's Conservative Party, which only had 297. Your vote in the general election is not for a political party or its leader, it's for your local MP or the candidates for the local MP. They will stay your MP regardless of whether they stay in the party you voted for, switch to another party, or end up with no party, otherwise known as an independent.
So unless you are living in Holborn and St Pancras or Richmond, you are not voting for Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak. You are voting for a local MP who most often has the endorsement of a party. The leaders of these parties are competing to win the most seats in order to form a majority after the election. This usually requires 325 members of the Commons, but as the Speaker cannot vote, neither can his deputies, and Sinn Féin doesn't take their seats because they don't have to swear allegiance to the King, governments can theoretically govern on a little less than 325.
However, in recent elections, there has been more of a trend in which people vote for party rather than by the choice of candidates for their local MP. This has come with a more general trend of presidentialism in party politics, as party leaders centralize authority of their own parties around them. This first past the post electoral system was created in a time where there were no formal political parties, and individual MPs had a bit more freedom to vote in the House of Commons on their own discretion. MPs of today are far more susceptible to pressure from party whip systems to vote along with party lines, especially if they want a potential ministerial position, or in otherwise extreme cases, if they want to keep party support in the following election. We don't want to understate the freedom of MP in the current WIS system, and we would encourage you to be aware of all these things when voting for your local MP.
So what are some of the pros and cons of the first past the post system as our electoral system? It used to be said that a benefit of the first past the post system is that it usually provides government with a stable majority in parliament to function, but if you look at the 2010s, that system only provided 2 years of a majority. It's also argued that the first past the post system will stop extreme parties from getting into parliament or government. This tends to work fairly well. In 2015, UKIP got 12.6% of the vote, but was spread thinly across the country, and they only had one seat in parliament. And throughout the 1930s, where the rest of Europe was veering off to the left and to the right, the Communist Party of Great Britain only ever had 2 MPs, and the British Union Fascists had none.
Which we can all agree with as a good thing. However, on the flip side, the first past the post system can feel a bit undemocratic, both in constituencies and nationally, because the seats go to the candidate who wins the most votes, not necessarily those who get the majority of votes. If there are a number of candidates, an MP can be elected with a small minority of the vote. In 2005, George Galloway, a familiar name for some of you by this point, won his seat as an independent with only 18.5, in fact, percent of the vote, which means that over 4/5 of the electorate did not vote for him. Nationally, in both 2005 and 2015, Tony Blair and David Cameron won a majority in Parliament with only 35.2% and 36.9% of the vote in their respective elections.
So this is usually a huge problem for smaller parties, which might get a large portion of the vote across the country, but only a handful of seats. For example, in the 1983 election, the Liberal Democrats got 25.4% of the vote, but only won 23 seats out of 650, or 3.5% of the seats. If we had a proportional representation system, the Lib Dems should have gotten something like 165 seats in that election.
Something that is really important in our electoral system is tactical voting. This is because the candidate with the most votes wins. By voting for a party that you earnestly believe in, you might assist the candidate you disagree with most. For instance, if you are passionate about the environment and you vote for the Green Party in a seat which is only realistically winnable by a Labour or a Conservative candidate, this could leave you with a candidate you strongly are opposed to. So if your goal is to get a candidate who supports the environment, you may have to pick your second or third choice.
So in some constituencies like Ceredigion, there is a sizable vote for the Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru, Labour and the Conservatives, so it's more of an open competition. However, in some constituencies, like the former East Devon constituency, voting for Labour was like voting for the Tories through the back door, because depending on the election, only the Lib Dems or the Independent Clarevites had a chance in recent elections. This is the same with the new Exmouth annexed East constituency. Since the last election, a number of constituencies have had boundary changes and some don't exist anymore. So we have new constituencies. But in this new constituency of Exmouth annexed to East, polling suggests that Labour and Conservatives are the only parties with a chance of winning. And Reform and Lib Dems each have a double-digit support, but a vote for either of them is likely to either put the Labour or Conservative candidate ahead against the interests of these Lib Dem Reform voters. All of this highlights how it is not how many votes a party can muster that will decide the outcome of an election. It's where they can be found. It's really common for a political party to increase their share of the vote and lose seats, and occasionally vice versa.
Wow. Now that we've discussed the electoral system, shall we discuss what we think might happen in the election.
Yeah, so this is more of our opinion, guys, so take it with a bit of a grain of salt. But we'll keep politically neutral. Now, the polls show that the Tory party are currently averaging around 23%, which is historically low. For context, John Major in 1997 had 29% of the vote and only got 165 seats out of the 650, which gave Labour a landslide. Also today, Labour is polling at a similar size of the vote. They achieved 97, 44%, which gained them 418 seats. So to start with, looking like they're doing quite well.
I mean, if this is reflected in the election in a few weeks' time, it would be the worst result the Tories would have faced since 1832, following the Great Reform Act, which started the process of the UK turning into a democracy, by the way, which we will talk about in
we will do
once we get
through medieval time. Yes.
yeah. So patience. But they might even get their smallest number of seats since the end of the Whig supremacy in 1761.
What we've got here is how essentially, depending on which month we're going by, electoral calculus says that they either get less seats than they get since 1761 or even earlier. And this is a time period where the Whigs are essentially have a monopoly on power for like 60 years. This is how far back you have to go for the Tories to be doing this badly.
Mind you, just because the polling's on your side doesn't mean that will be necessarily reflected in the election results. I mean, Theresa May was quite a bit behind in the polls and still ended up with a fairly hung parliament.
No, she was ahead of the polls. She went from 20 points ahead and then did something quite bad about social care, wasn't it? About like a dementia tax.
Yes.
And then it cleared between, she got 42 and then Corbyn got 40. And that had led to the hung parliament. Yeah.
I did that the whole wrong way round.
I know, right? Okay, well, let's just talk about how one thing we've got to consider in this election is turnout, because it's getting lower in this country. I mean, it kind of took a real dive in 2001. It's gone up again since, but we're wondering what happens if the Tory vote just stays home because they're so wound up with the whole Boris Johnson Partygate, Liz Truss destroying the economy and everything going bye-bye. It's like
you could have a lower turnout but then end up with a high majority for a particular party, just because quite a lot of people will stay at home and the people who are motivated to vote may vote for the opposition.
I mean, there's also, of course, the new factor of selection, because in the last election, the Brexit Party stood down in all the seats the Conservatives were standing in, which basically meant in all those seats, Boris Johnson was really standing unopposed on the right. So at this time, they're not going to do that, as far as we can tell. And if we're going by anything like the last by-election in Blackpool South, the Reform Party almost overtook them. It was within a percentage point. The Tories got 17.5% of the vote, and Reform got 16.9%. And from what I can tell, like it's not like UKIP where half the vote comes from Labour, half the vote comes from Tory. In this case, it's all coming from the Tory within like most of it. But so nationally, these guys are polling at around 9 to 14%. And even if it kind of compresses as the election goes on, I still think that this, in marginal seats all across the country, this will really cause some real issues where Tories haven't previously had them, because previously you're looking at Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, and in Wales, Plaid Cymru splitting the progressive vote, while the Tories are keeping it together.
Some facts in your face. Right, you also have to consider, the issues at the time. We cannot say that the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories will not impact potential votes for Labour or the Conservatives. And other such issues as climate change will have an effect, health.
I mean, Gaza, though, it's going to affect Labour more than it's going to affect the Tories, because Labour. Because I think after the local elections, the BBC did some analysis, and they said that essentially that in areas where the Muslim population was above 20%, the Labour vote was down by 21%. And this is like in the Labour heartland areas. This is like in quite urban areas.
And Labour is historically strong in urban areas, so we'll see how that impacts with both parties. I mean,
I think one thing to think about is that the problem that the Tories have is that they've been so focused on with the Rwanda plan on keeping hold of the reform votes, because the thing is the Tory party can move further and further away. Look at where David Cameron was coming in. He was socially liberal, closer to the centre, and he did win votes from Lib Dems in 2010 and 2015.
I
And
mean, me and you may disagree with Cameron's social liberalism. However, yes, the Conservatives moving to the right does leave them open for a potential Lib Dem resurgence in the southern seats.
well, I mean, we saw that in some by-elections, didn't we?
Yeah, and if those by-elections, and if you can name the seats, do so.
Honiton and Tiverton, that was the Neil Parish porn scandal, where Richard Ford got a 38-point swing, although that constituency's boundaries have changed, so that might not be the same thing. You've also got Somerton and Frome, which achieved a 29% swing, and North Shropshire, which the Lib Dems won from the Tories for the first time in 115 years. Previously, it had been run by a Liberal, but then been controlled by Tories for 100 years before that. So, and this is a 34% swing. So the Lib Dems really are picking up some Tory heartland seats where you have these kind of upper middle class people who don't feel comfortable about Brexit. They don't feel comfortable about the Rwanda plan, and the Tories are basically hemorrhaging them on one side because they're too focused on former UKIP and BNP voters.
Yeah, and if those by-elections are representative of other seats in those areas, then you could see a Liberal Democrat Party with potential political influence in the House of Commons.
So what do you reckon? Like, if there was like a hung, I mean, the thing is, saying there's really a hung parliament at this point is not very likely. But if there was, Labour would be the largest party. Would you reckon the Lib Dems will form a coalition with the Labour, and then maybe you might get more of a customs union situation?
Yeah. Well, that would be a question for Starmer.
Yeah, I suppose.
Who also is fighting over Brexit's areas that, or areas that have voted majority for Brexit in the referendum. And he may try and keep those votes by not engaging with discussions that much, but you never know.
Yeah. I think something that's quite interesting though is Scotland, because before 2015, Scotland made up like a huge area of the Labour vote and lots of seats. Like in 2015, they lost 40 seats in Scotland, and basically the SNP have more or less kept them in 2017, 2019. But what I'm reckoning is, and this is really important because when the SNP had their huge wave in 2015, Labour lost 40, Lib Dems lost 10, Tories didn't lose any because they only had one seat in Scotland to begin with. So it's a bit different than that now. But if Labour can win back, and because of how badly the SNP are doing at the moment,
yeah, they're not exactly in a solid political position.
Yeah, I mean, you've had two leaders, and then the corruption scandal, and then fights about trans rights within the party, as well as like outside
and
of it.
Environmental obligations as well.
Yeah, and losing the Green Party, and this is the thing, like. What was it? It was the YouGov poll, wasn't it? It was on Monday, and it was 10 points above Labour. Labour had 39, SNP had 29, and Tories were down on 12. But so, in Scotland, so it's not very good.
Yeah, we could be seeing I mean, not the destruction of SNP, but a certain diminishing in Scotland. I mean, if the Conservatives really do lose, could we see the destruction of the Conservative Party?
Yeah,
that is interesting.
I think that's an exaggeration, but
no,
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, could you imagine the Tories getting double digits in the next election? Because I mean, that's some of the polling seems to be suggesting, but that would seem quite mad actually. Because at that point you're talking about the Lib Dems becoming leaders of the opposition, because Labour's not going to pick up these very rural seats. I don't know.
Well,
one thing we haven't talked about is the Green Party in this, because Caroline Lucas is standing down, and I mean, will the Greens keep fighting without her? I don't know.
Yeah, or I mean, some like the idea of potentially Greens spreading around. You never know; they could come around Bristol.
Yeah.
Might see a couple Green MPs popping up.
Now, they did do really well in the general election. I'm sorry, not general election. The locals in May, they got they didn't get overturned, but they got 34 seats out of 70, so they're essentially in control.
No, but it's also important to remember that the electoral systems in local elections and general elections are very different. And as we discussed earlier in this episode, the first past the post system is not very welcoming to smaller parties.
Yeah, the turnout will be much higher in the general election than the locals, even if it's quite low by historic standards. We're not going to get up to 1950 again, where there was 80% turnout. That's not going to happen.
No, I'll be particularly interested just to see the turnout, because I have a feeling personally that turnout may be lower than we've had in the last few years.
well, just pure dissatisfaction with everything.
Yeah, I
like
think there's a
with
lot.
austerity, with
Oh yeah, with
Brexit.
feeling like potentially. I mean, we've had the we've had 14 years of Conservative government with a lot of issues, and society has.
I mean,
Well,
do you
a lot
reckon
of
there's any chance of a 1992 situation with like how everyone thought Newkinnock was going to get in, but then just
John Major somehow
yeah.
keeps toe.
Yeah.
A toe in
I mean,
Parliament.
I mean, the thing is, at that point, no, what happened? This is the 1992 election was key because it was before the ERM crash, wasn't it? This is like Bob His before we're both born. I don't know why I know so much about this, apart from a huge nerd. Right, where were we? I mean,
John Major. In response to that, I mean, John Major had the image of Margaret Thatcher. Whatever you think about her, I personally don't agree with a lot of what she did, but she had a very strong image. Now, Rishi Sunak is following several prime ministers and leaders of the Conservative Party that have had, all in their own ways, had major messes or mess ups.
I mean, do you see any chance the Tories actually winning this? Because I'm thinking that the only problem
very unlikely
is that everyone always assumes Labour's going to win it. The turnout's low and the Tories scrape by. That's the only thing that's got to really worry about. Like, if people don't vote, because if young people don't vote, if especially with students and stuff, if this is where the votes are to be had, because if we can get that turnout up, then.
No, I mean, there's an argument to be made that Labour is not exactly Starmer's Labour is not galvanising the youth vote.
Oh no, but
you
and I know we're not particularly 100% pleased with Starmer all the time because he can try a little bit too hard to appeal to the Tory right. But this is a little bit our politics and not really analysis, so let's kind of slide away from this a little bit.
No. But I personally believe that a lower turnout this election would impact the Conservative vote more than the Labour vote.
Yeah, because it's going to be the people who are pissed off with the Tories or apathetic about it is not going to stay home.
Yeah, they may not vote for different parties, but they may just choose not to vote at all.
Okay. I mean, is there anything else we haven't talked about at all?
Well, I think that's in the interest of time.
Okay, so before we finish, shall we have a little friendly chat about what do you think the makeup of the Parliament's going to be after this election?
Oh.
Like, if you have to take a wild guess, what size of Labour majority? Is it going to be a hung Parliament with a Labour, like 300 seats? Like, where do you? Because I think we both agree that Labour's going to win the next election. It's just we can't. They can't afford to take it for granted.
No. Well, I think we've discussed this in a previous episode on our constitutional series. I think you would prefer that Labour doesn't get a big majority. That they have to balance out their policy with another party, probably the Lib Dems.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of one party having 400 seats because when that happens, they tend to get away with doing anything, especially when you start a parliament, because then the Lords can't block you for a while either. It's not.
No. So, but I my guess is as good as yours in this one. I mean, it could be a major majority, or it could be.
Is that a major as in big or major as in 92?
As in big.
Yeah.
A very big majority. If some polls are to be believed, we'll see.
So tell you what, if you're saying like 420, and I'll say 360, and we'll see who's closer.
Yeah, we can have a pre-election day episode just to remind you, whoever watches this.
We'll do our own little kind of BBC version for this from one person who watches our videos. It'll be great. It'll be fine.
Yeah. I hope you bloody enjoy it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, guys, for watching, and we'll be out with the Medieval Parliament one either tomorrow or next week. So I don't know if we should count this one as a full episode. We give us more time to do other things.
Yeah, this is an election special. Okay, you're not going to get this every bloody week. Don't expect more.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Have a good night.